A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Chains and Instinct. The curse had been slowly killing the kingdom of Greymont for 3 years, and Alpha King Calder had watched every agonizing moment of its descent. He stood at the window of his study, hands braced against the stone frame, staring out at gardens that had once bloomed with wild roses and night-flowering jasmine. Now they were a wasteland of brittle stems and cracked earth, a graveyard of beauty that matched the growing emptiness inside him. Beyond the castle walls, his territory stretched into the distance, forests that had turned skeletal, rivers running shallow and muddy where they had once run clear. The reports came daily, each one worse than the last. Another child born too weak to shift, another elder who couldn't hold their wolf form anymore. Crops withering despite desperate attempts to coax life from poisoned soil. His people were dying by degrees, and he could do nothing to stop it. 3 years since the curse had settled over his kingdom following the death of his parents to a wasting sickness no healer could explain or cure. 3 years since he had taken the throne with the weight of a dying realm on his shoulders. 3 years of searching for answers, consulting every text in the royal archives, sending messengers to distant pacts, seeking counsel from anyone who might know how to break a curse that seemed woven into the very fabric of the land itself. The prophecy was known to everyone in the kingdom, passed down through generations like a fairy tale told to comfort children in dark times. An Omega born under a blood moon would come to break the curse during the next eclipse. It was vague, frustratingly incomplete, more hope than actual guidance. The original scroll containing the full prophecy had been lost generations ago, leaving them with only fragments of knowledge and a desperate kind of faith. The next eclipse was in 5 days. Calder had no Omega, no savior, no miracle waiting to manifest. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, pacing and snarling at shadows. It had been growing worse over the past weeks, an agitation that made him short-tempered and unable to sleep properly. He'd chalked it up to stress, to the approaching eclipse, and the knowledge that he was failing his people. But today the restlessness had become almost unbearable. A constant crawling sensation under his skin, a pull he couldn't identify or understand. A knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. "Enter," he called, not turning from the window. "Your Majesty." The voice belonged to Evander, his beta. Loyal Evander, who had served at his side for 10 years, who had been his father's trusted advisor before him. "The council is gathering for the eclipse preparations meeting." Calder finally turned. Evander stood in the doorway, immaculately dressed as always, dirty blonde hair perfectly arranged, ice blue eyes calm and steady. Everything about the man radiated competence and control, which was why Calder trusted him as much as he trusted anyone. "I'll be there shortly," Calder said, running a hand through his dark hair. It had grown longer than he usually kept it, brushing his shoulders now, but he hadn't bothered with a trim. Vanity seemed pointless when his kingdom was dying. Evander hesitated. "Sire, are you well? You seem distracted." "I'm fine." The lie came easily. Kings didn't admit to feeling lost or uncertain, even to those closest to them, especially not 5 days before an eclipse that might be their last hope. "Just tired," of course. Evander's expression was sympathetic but unreadable. He'd always been good at that, showing just enough emotion to seem genuine without ever revealing what he truly thought. "I'll let the council know you're on your way." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Calder stood alone in his study for another moment, trying to wrestle his wolf back under control. The agitation was getting worse, not better. His wolf wanted something, was searching for something, but Calder had no idea what. It was maddening. Finally, he forced himself to move, striding out of his study and through the castle corridors toward the council chamber. Servants bowed as he passed, their faces drawn and worried. Everyone in the castle reflected the sickness of the land, growing thinner and more anxious as the curse tightened its grip. The council chamber was in the eastern wing, a large room with high ceilings and tapestries depicting the history of Greymont's wolf shifters. 12 council members sat around the long table, alphas from various territories within his kingdom, all of them looking as exhausted and desperate as Calder felt. He took his seat at the head of the table. "Report," he said simply. Lord Hadrian, an older alpha from the southern territories, spoke first. The harvest continues to fail, Your Majesty. We've lost another quarter of the wheat crop this week. If this continues, we'll face serious food shortages by winter. Lady Vivian, who oversaw the northern forests, added, "The game has nearly disappeared from the hunting grounds. Our wolves are too weak to chase what little remains. We're relying almost entirely on preserved stores now." The reports continued, each one painting the same bleak picture. Calder listened to all of it, his jaw tight, his wolf snarling and pacing beneath his skin. He tried to focus on the words, on the logistics they needed to discuss. But that strange pull was intensifying, becoming impossible to ignore. It felt like something was calling to him, pulling him in a specific direction. Evander was speaking now, discussing security preparations for the eclipse gathering they'd planned in the castle gardens. The words washed over Calder without really registering. His attention had narrowed to that insistent tug, that inexplicable need to move, to follow, to find. His wolf was going insane inside him, clawing and howling. Calder stood abruptly, cutting off whatever Lord Hadrian had been saying mid-sentence. All eyes turned to him in surprise. "Your Majesty?" Evander's voice held a note of concern. "Is something wrong?" "I need to step out," Calder said, already moving toward the door. He couldn't explain it, couldn't justify it, but every instinct he had was screaming at him to follow that pull. "Continue without me." He didn't wait for a response, didn't acknowledge the confused looks from his council members. He strode out of the chamber and into the corridor, letting his wolf guide him. The agitation that had been building for weeks suddenly had direction, purpose. His feet carried him through hallways he'd walked 1,000 times, but he wasn't consciously choosing his path. His wolf was in control now, following something Calder couldn't see or smell, but could feel with absolute certainty. The pull led him to the residential wing where his highest-ranking court members had their chambers, toward Evander's apartment specifically. That should have struck him as strange, but his wolf was too focused, too intent on whatever it sensed. Calder walked faster, his heartbeat accelerating. Something was here, something important. Something that made his wolf howl with recognition, even though Calder himself didn't understand what he was responding to. He turned the corner into the corridor leading to Evander's chambers and stopped. His beta stood outside his own door, and the expression on Evander's face was the first time in 10 years that Calder had seen the man look genuinely rattled. "Your Majesty," Evander said, his voice carefully controlled but with an edge of tension underneath. "I wasn't expecting you to follow. Is something wrong?" "Everything. Nothing." Calder didn't know how to answer, because he didn't know what was happening to him, only that he needed to be here, needed to find whatever his wolf was desperately seeking. "I need to check your chambers," Calder heard himself say. Evander's expression flickered, just for a second, with something that might have been panic, before his usual mask of calm competence slid back into place. "Of course, sire, though I'm not sure what you're looking for. Is there a security concern?" The fact that Evander was asking questions instead of simply stepping aside and opening the door made Calder's wolf snarl viciously. His eyes must have flashed gold because Evander actually took a step back. "Open the door, Evander." Calder's voice had dropped into the alpha command that very few wolves could resist, the tone that demanded immediate obedience. For a heartbeat, Evander looked like he might refuse. Then his shoulders sagged slightly in resignation, and he pushed open the door to his chambers. Calder brushed past him, entering the sitting room. It was neat and well-appointed, exactly what he'd expect from his beta's quarters. A desk with carefully organized papers, bookshelves lined with texts on pack law and history, a fireplace with 2 chairs positioned for reading. Nothing out of place. Nothing that explained the howling need inside him. But his wolf wasn't satisfied. It pulled him deeper into the chambers, past the sitting room, into the bedroom beyond. Evander followed, still trying to maintain his composure, but Calder could smell the anxiety rolling off him now, fear masked poorly by forced calm. The bedroom was similarly unremarkable. A large bed, more bookshelves, a wardrobe, a window overlooking the eastern gardens. And then Calder saw it, a slight gap in the tapestry hanging on the far wall, as if the heavy fabric had been disturbed and hadn't quite settled back into place correctly. His wolf roared. Calder crossed the room in 3 long strides and yanked the tapestry aside. Behind it, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look, was a seam in the stone wall. A panel, designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding rock, and it was slightly ajar. Behind him, Evander inhaled sharply. "Your Majesty, I can explain." Calder wasn't listening. He pushed against the panel and it swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a small chamber beyond. The space was dark and windowless, lit only by the light spilling in from the bedroom now that the door was open. The smell hit him first. Unwashed skin, infection, fear, and underneath it all a scent that made his wolf go absolutely feral with recognition. Sweet and wild, like honey and pine smoke, and something indefinably perfect. His eyes adjusted to the dimness, and he saw her. A woman sat on the floor against the far wall, thin wrists wrapped in silver chains that were bolted to the stone. She was gaunt, her skin pale except for the angry red burns where the silver touched her. Her hair was a tangled mass of reddish-brown, and her clothes were dirty and torn. But her eyes, golden amber eyes that met his with a mixture of defiance and desperate hope. The moment their gazes locked, pain exploded in Calder's chest. A searing, burning sensation that made him gasp, made his wolf throw its head back and howl in recognition and triumph and rage all at once. The mark was forming on the back of his neck, invisible but burning like a brand. Every nerve in his body lit up with awareness of her, connection to her, need for her, mate, his mate. The woman in chains was his fated mate, and she was staring at him like she felt it too, her amber eyes going wide with shock as the bond snapped into place between them. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. For a long moment, Calder couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in his head and the burning sensation spreading across the back of his neck where the mate mark was forming. His wolf had gone from agitated to absolutely feral in the span of a heartbeat, howling and snarling with a possessive fury that threatened to overwhelm his human control. Mate. His mate. Chained to a wall in his beta's secret chamber, injured and terrified and staring at him with those impossible amber eyes. The woman gasped, her hand flying to her own neck as if she could feel the mark forming there too. "What?" Her voice was hoarse from disuse, barely more than a whisper. "What is this?" She could feel it, the bond snapping into place between them, invisible but undeniable, a connection that rewrote everything Calder thought he knew about his life in the space of seconds. She was feeling the same pull, the same recognition, the same inevitable certainty that their fates had just become inextricably tangled. "Your Majesty, please, let me explain." Evander's voice came from behind him, tight with poorly concealed panic. The sound of his beta's voice cut through the haze of shock, and suddenly, Calder's paralysis broke. Rage unlike anything he'd ever experienced flooded his system, hot and vicious and demanding blood. His wolf wanted to tear Evander apart, wanted to make him suffer for every moment this woman had spent in chains, and it took every ounce of control Calder possessed not to shift right there and let his wolf have what it wanted. He spun around, and Evander actually stumbled backward at whatever he saw in Calder's face. "Explain?" Calder's voice came out as a low growl, his eyes flashing gold as his wolf pressed close to the surface. "You have a woman chained in a hidden room in your chambers, and you want to explain?" Evander's usual mask of calm competence had shattered completely. His ice-blue eyes darted between Calder and the open panel, calculating and desperate. "This isn't what it looks like." "Then what is it?" Calder took a step toward him, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel his claws threatening to extend, his wolf snarling for release. "Tell me why my mate is chained to your wall." The word hung in the air between them. Mate. Evander's expression shifted, shock, and something that might have been resignation flickering across his features. "Your mate," Evander repeated slowly. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and Calder saw the exact moment his beta made a decision. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know she was your mate." "That doesn't answer my question." Calder's voice was dangerously quiet now. "Why is she here at all?" Evander opened his mouth to respond, but whatever he was about to say was cut off by a weak voice from the hidden chamber. "He took me." The woman's words were barely audible, but they cut through the tension like a blade. 6 weeks ago, soldiers came to my village, said the Alpha King required my presence. I thought I was being summoned for some official purpose. Instead, he brought me here, locked me in this room. I haven't seen daylight since. 6 weeks. Calder's wolf howled with fury. His mate had been imprisoned in his own castle for 6 weeks, and he'd had no idea. The betrayal of it, the violation, made him want to destroy something. He turned back to Evander, and this time he didn't bother hiding the gold in his eyes or the growl in his voice. Is this true? For a moment, Evander looked like he might try to deny it. Then something in his expression hardened, shifted from panic to cold calculation. Yes. I took her from the village of Millbrook. She fits the description from the prophecy. Born during a blood moon eclipse, the crescent mark, the amber eyes. I thought I was doing what was necessary for the kingdom. Necessary? Calder barely recognized his own voice. Kidnapping an Omega and keeping her chained in secret is necessary? You don't understand, Evander started to say, but he didn't get to finish, because Calder's wolf had finally had enough of talking. Evander must have seen it coming in Calder's eyes, because he turned and bolted for the door. He was fast, beta fast, but Calder was faster. He caught Evander before he'd made it 3 steps, grabbing him by the back of his jacket and hauling him backward with enough force to slam him against the wall. Evander twisted in his grip, and suddenly there was a knife in his hand, appearing from some hidden sheath. He slashed upward in a desperate arc, aiming for Calder's throat. Calder caught his wrist mid-strike, squeezing until he felt bones grind together. Evander cried out in pain, and the knife clattered to the floor. You dare, Calder snarled, his wolf so close to the surface now that his voice was barely human. You dare raise a weapon against your Alpha King? Evander's face had gone white, but there was a manic kind of defiance in his eyes. You don't understand what's at stake. The eclipse is in 5 days. 5 days. And if we don't break the curse, the kingdom dies. I found the answer. I found the way to save everyone. But you're too bound by your precious honor to do what needs to be done. What are you talking about? Calder demanded, tightening his grip. His other hand had moved to Evander's throat. Not squeezing yet, but making the threat clear. The prophecy, Evander gasped out. I found the rest of it. The part that was lost. There are 2 ways to break the curse. 2 ways, but only one that guarantees success. Before Calder could respond, before he could demand more answers, the sound of running footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. His roar when he'd confronted Evander must have carried, because suddenly the doorway was filled with guards, their weapons drawn, their eyes wide as they took in the scene, their Alpha King with his hands on his beta's throat, the hidden chamber visible behind them, the woman in chains. Seize him, Calder commanded, releasing Evander and stepping back. His wolf wanted to finish this personally, wanted blood and vengeance, but his human mind knew that wouldn't serve anyone. This required justice, not rage. Take him to the dungeons. Triple guard. No one goes in or out without my direct order. If he escapes, I'll have the heads of everyone responsible. The guards moved immediately, grabbing Evander's arms and wrenching them behind his back. To his credit, the beta didn't struggle. He just stared at Calder with an expression that might have been regret, or might have been contempt. It was impossible to tell. You're making a mistake, Evander said, as the guards hauled him toward the door. Ask her about the prophecy. Ask her what she's really meant for. You'll see. You'll understand why I did this. Take him away, Calder ordered, not wanting to hear another word from the man who had been his most trusted advisor and had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. The guards dragged Evander out. Calder stood there breathing hard, trying to wrestle his wolf back under control. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to go to his mate, to get her out of those chains, to hold her and reassure her, and make absolutely certain she was real and safe and his. But he forced himself to wait until the sounds of the guards taking Evander away had faded completely, forced himself to take several long breaths and push down the rage and possessiveness until he could think clearly again. Then he turned back to the hidden chamber. The woman was still sitting against the wall, her eyes wide and fixed on him. She looked fragile, breakable, with her thin frame and the way her hands trembled slightly where they rested in her lap. But there was strength in the set of her jaw, in the way she met his gaze without flinching. Calder approached slowly, carefully, the way he might approach a wounded animal. His wolf was howling at him to move faster, to claim her, to mark her. But his human side knew she had to be terrified. She'd been imprisoned for 6 weeks. She had no reason to trust him, mate bond or not. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, kneeling down so he was at her eye level rather than looming over her. "I swear to you, you're safe now." She studied his face, those amber eyes searching for something. "You're the Alpha King," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. My name is Calder." He kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. "What's yours?" "Rhiannon." Her voice was still hoarse, but stronger than before. "Are you really going to let me go?" The question made his chest tighten. "Yes, immediately." "These chains." He reached for the silver shackles around her wrists, and she flinched back instinctively. He froze. "I need to remove them. They're hurting you." Rhiannon hesitated, then slowly extended her arms. The skin beneath the silver was raw and blistered, the burns obviously infected. Calder's wolf snarled at the sight, at the evidence of her suffering. Silver was one of the few things that could seriously harm a shifter, and prolonged contact could be agonizing. The fact that she'd endured this for weeks without breaking spoke to a core of strength that belied her fragile appearance. Calder examined the shackles. They were locked, but the mechanism was simple. He could break them easily, but he'd have to be careful not to hurt her in the process. "This might be uncomfortable," he warned. "I'm going to break the locks. Try to stay still." Rhiannon nodded, her jaw set with determination. Calder gripped the first shackle on either side of the lock and pulled. His strength was considerable even in human form, and the metal shrieked in protest before the lock mechanism snapped. He carefully pried the shackle open and removed it from her wrist, revealing the full extent of the damage beneath. The burns were deep, weeping, angry red wounds that had clearly been festering for days, if not weeks. The sight of them made rage surge through him again, fresh and hot. He moved to the second shackle and broke it the same way, then the ones around her ankles. When the last piece of silver fell away, Rhiannon sagged forward slightly, as if she'd been holding herself rigid and could finally relax. "Can you stand?" Calder asked. She tried, pushing herself up the wall, but her legs gave out almost immediately. Calder caught her before she could fall, his hands gentle on her arms, despite the desperate need his wolf felt to pull her close and never let go. "I've got you," he said. "I'm going to carry you out of here. Is that all right?" Rhiannon looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the internal struggle playing out behind her eyes. She didn't know him, had no reason to trust him beyond the mate bond she was undoubtedly feeling, but probably didn't understand. But she was also clearly too weak to walk on her own, and staying in this hidden prison wasn't an option. Finally, she nodded. Calder slipped one arm under her knees, and the other around her back, lifting her as carefully as he could. She weighed almost nothing, far too light. Evidence of weeks of inadequate food and water. His wolf rumbled with protective fury. Rhiannon's head lolled against his shoulder as he carried her out of the hidden chamber, through Evander's bedroom, and out into the corridor. More guards had gathered there, their faces shocked as they saw their Alpha King carrying an injured woman in his arms. "Summon the royal healer," Calder commanded. "Have her meet me in my private chambers immediately. And someone find Lady Mora. Tell her I need fresh clothing and hot water brought up." The guards scattered to follow his orders. Calder didn't wait to see if they complied. He strode through the castle corridors with Rhiannon in his arms, aware of every eye that turned to watch them pass, every whispered question that followed in their wake. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Nothing mattered except getting his mate to safety and tending to her injuries. By the time he reached his chambers in the royal wing, Rhiannon had fallen unconscious, her body finally giving in to exhaustion and pain. Calder laid her gently on his bed, brushing tangled hair back from her face with a tenderness that surprised him. His mate. This woman he didn't know, who'd been suffering in secret while he'd been oblivious. The bond between them pulsed with life, with rightness, with an inevitability that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. The royal healer, an older woman named Constance, arrived within minutes, her expression professional but concerned as she took in the unconscious woman on the Alpha King's bed. "What happened?" she asked, already moving to examine Rhiannon. "She was imprisoned. Chained with silver for 6 weeks, Calder said, his voice tight. "The burns are infected. She's malnourished and dehydrated. Fix it." Constance didn't ask questions. She worked with efficient competence, examining the burns, checking Rhiannon's pulse and breathing, murmuring observations to herself. Lady Mora arrived with clothing and hot water, her eyes wide with curiosity but wise enough not to voice it. Calder stood to the side, his arms crossed, watching every move the healer made. His wolf refused to leave, refused to let their mate out of sight even though she was clearly in capable hands. "The burns will heal," Constance said, finally straightening up. "But it will take time. I'll prepare a salve to prevent further infection and help with the scarring. The dehydration and malnutrition are more concerning. She needs fluids, small amounts of food given frequently, and rest. Lots of rest. She'll have it," Calder said immediately. "Whatever she needs." Constance gave him a long, searching look. "May I ask who this woman is, Your Majesty?" Calder's hand moved unconsciously to the back of his neck, where the mate mark was still burning with fresh awareness. "That's complicated," he said quietly, "but she's under my protection now. No one is to know she's here except those in this room. Not until I understand what's happened." The healer nodded slowly, understanding or at least accepting his need for discretion. She prepared her salves and left detailed instructions with Lady Mora for Rhiannon's care, then departed with a promise to return in the morning. Calder dismissed Lady Mora as well, wanting privacy. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his eyes on Rhiannon's sleeping face. The mate bond confirmed what he'd suspected the moment he found her. This woman was the Omega from the prophecy, the one supposedly destined to break the curse. The timing of her appearance, the circumstances of her captivity, Evander's cryptic words about finding the rest of the prophecy, it all pointed to something bigger than a simple kidnapping. But right now, in this moment, Calder didn't care about prophecies or curses or the fate of the kingdom. Right now, all that mattered was the woman sleeping in his bed, her breathing finally even and peaceful, her pain temporarily eased, his mate, and he would burn down his own kingdom before he let anyone hurt her again. Chapter 3. Fractured Trust. Rhiannon woke slowly, awareness returning in layers. First came the sensation of softness beneath her, so different from the cold stone floor she'd grown accustomed to that her eyes flew open in alarm. Then came the warmth, the clean smell of lavender and cedar, the way light filtered through gauzy curtains across a room that was larger than the entire cottage where she'd grown up. Panic seized her chest. This wasn't the hidden chamber. Where was she? She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, as pain lanced through her wrists and ankles where the silver had burned her. A soft gasp escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Easy." A deep voice came from somewhere to her left, and Rhiannon's head snapped toward the sound. The Alpha King sat in a chair beside the bed, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, his brown eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to simultaneously move closer and flee. He looked exhausted, lines of strain around his eyes and mouth, and she had the distinct impression he'd been sitting there watching her sleep for some time. The memory of what had happened came flooding back, the hidden door opening, those eyes meeting hers. The sudden, overwhelming sensation that had exploded through her chest, the burning at the base of her neck, the inexplicable certainty that this man was important in a way she couldn't begin to understand. "Where am I?" Her voice came out rough and uncertain. "My private chambers," he said, making no move to stand or approach. "You're safe here, I promise." Rhiannon looked around more carefully now, taking in the expensive furnishings, the tapestries on the walls depicting wolves running beneath a full moon, the massive fireplace where logs burned steadily. This was the room of someone powerful, someone who commanded kingdoms, someone she had no reason to trust. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, pulling the silk sheets up higher, even though she was still fully dressed in her dirty, torn clothing. Through the night, and most of the day. It's late afternoon now. Calder's voice remained gentle, as if he were afraid of spooking her. The healer said you needed rest. Your body has been through an ordeal. That was putting it mildly. 6 weeks in that darkness. 6 weeks of silver burning her skin. 6 weeks of wondering if anyone would ever find her, or if she'd simply die in that hidden room and no one would ever know. What happened to Evander? The name tasted bitter on her tongue. He's in the dungeons, under heavy guard. Something dark flickered across Calder's expression. He won't hurt you again. I swear it. Rhiannon studied him. This stranger who looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered. Why do you care? You don't know me. Calder was quiet for a moment, his hand moving unconsciously to the back of his neck. You felt it yesterday, didn't you? When our eyes met. Heat flooded her face because yes, she'd felt it. That inexplicable pull. The burning sensation. The way every nerve in her body had suddenly become aware of him in a way that made no sense. I don't understand what it was, she admitted quietly. It's called a mate bond. Calder leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious but not unkind. In our world, shifters sometimes recognize their fated mate, the one person they're meant to be with. When two mates meet, a bond forms between them. It's rare, but when it happens, it's unmistakable. Rhiannon's breath caught. Are you saying we're mates? Yes. He said it simply, without drama or pressure. I know this must be overwhelming. You've been through trauma. You're injured and exhausted. And now a stranger is telling you that fate has bound you to him. I'm not asking anything of you. I just wanted you to understand what you're feeling. She didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to deny it, to reject the very idea that her fate could be decided by some mystical force she'd never believed in. But she couldn't deny what she'd felt. What she was still feeling even now. A pull toward this man. A sense of rightness that terrified her precisely because it was so strong. I spent 6 weeks as a prisoner, Rhiannon said, her voice harder now. 6 weeks chained by someone in a position of authority who claimed to be acting for the kingdom's good. Why should I trust another alpha? Why should I believe any of this isn't just another prison with prettier walls? The words came out harsher than she'd intended. But she needed him to understand. Needed him to see that she wasn't going to simply accept this bond or his protection without question. To her surprise, Calder nodded slowly. You're right not to trust me. I've done nothing to earn it. My own beta imprisoned you in my castle for 6 weeks, and I had no idea. That's a failure on my part, and I don't expect you to overlook it. He paused, something vulnerable crossing his features. I'm not asking you to accept the mate bond. I'm not asking you to stay if you don't want to. I just need to understand what happened. Will you tell me your story? The request was so simple, so free of demand or pressure, that Rhiannon felt some of her defensive walls crack slightly. What do you want to know? She asked. Everything. Start wherever feels right. Rhiannon took a slow breath, gathering her thoughts. I'm from Millbrook, a small village about 3 days' ride from here. I lost my parents when I was 5 years old. Rogues attacked during the night. My mother hid me in a root cellar before they... Her throat tightened. Even 19 years later, the memory had edges that cut. The village found me the next morning. After that, the community raised me, but especially Edith, the local healer. She took me in, taught me about herbs and how to care for sick animals. You're a healer? Calder asked. Not exactly. I don't have any real power, nothing magical. But I've always had a way with animals. Sick ones, injured ones, even wild creatures that should have been afraid of people. They'd calm when I was near, let me touch them, help them. Edith said I had a gift, but it was subtle, nothing dramatic. Calder was watching her intently now, and she had the sense he was cataloging every detail. Go on. 6 weeks ago, soldiers came to Millbrook, led by Evander, though I didn't know his title at the time. He said the Alpha King required my presence, that I was needed for important matters concerning the kingdom. He was polite, official. I thought I was being summoned for some legitimate purpose, maybe to help with sick wolves or something related to my work with Edith. Her hands clenched in the sheets as the memory sharpened. The moment we arrived at the castle, everything changed. He brought me to his chambers, showed me that hidden room, and locked me inside before I could even ask what was happening. He put those silver chains on me himself. Rhiannon could still remember the burning, the shock of pain, as the metal touched her skin. She'd screamed, begged him to stop. But Evander had just worked with cold efficiency until she was secured to the wall. Did he tell you why? Calder's voice had gone very quiet, very controlled, but she could see the rage simmering beneath the surface. Only that it was necessary. That I was important to some prophecy. And this was to keep me safe until the time was right. He visited every day, brought minimal food and water, but he never explained what he actually intended to do with me. She met Calder's eyes. I tried to escape. So many times. But the silver was too painful, and I was getting weaker every day. Silence fell between them. Calder's jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists where they rested on his knees. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry that happened to you in my castle, under my nose, by someone I trusted." There are no words adequate for that kind of betrayal. Rhiannon didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded. "I need to speak with Evander again," Calder said, standing. "There's more to this than simple kidnapping. He mentioned a prophecy. Mentioned that he found the rest of some text. I need to know what he knows. Will you hurt him?" The question came out before Rhiannon could stop it. Calder looked at her, and for a moment she saw the predator beneath the careful control. "I want to. Every instinct I have is screaming to tear him apart for what he did to you. But no. I'll get answers first. Justice, not vengeance." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Will you still be here when I return? Or would you prefer to leave?" It was the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, that made Rhiannon say, "I'll be here. I want answers too." Calder nodded once and left. Rhiannon sat alone in the enormous bed, her mind racing. A mate bond, a prophecy, a beta who had imprisoned her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. It felt like she'd fallen into someone else's story, some grand tale of destiny and magic that had nothing to do with the simple healer's apprentice from Millbrook, who just wanted to live quietly and help where she could. But the burning sensation at the base of her neck said otherwise. Whatever this was, she was in it now. An hour later, Calder returned, and he wasn't alone. 2 guards flanked him, and between them, his hands bound in iron, was Evander. The beta looked worse than Rhiannon remembered. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated, his hair disheveled, his clothing dirty, but his ice-blue eyes were still sharp, still calculating as they swept the room and landed on her. "Rhiannon," he said, almost conversationally, "I see you've recovered somewhat." "Good. Silence," Calder commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." Evander sat, though his expression suggested he was humoring the Alpha King rather than obeying. The guards took positions on either side of the door. Calder remained standing, his arms crossed. "You said you found the rest of the prophecy." "Show me." "It's in my chambers. Hidden compartment in the desk." Evander's tone was almost bored. "Second drawer from the top, false bottom. You'll find a scroll fragment. Very old, very valuable. I acquired it from a monastery library 6 months ago." Calder nodded to one of the guards, who left immediately to retrieve it. They waited in tense silence until the guard returned several minutes later, carrying a yellowed piece of parchment sealed in a protective leather case. Calder opened the case carefully and removed the scroll fragment. His eyes scanned the text, and Rhiannon watched his expression shift from skepticism to shock to cold fury. "This can't be right," Calder said quietly. "But it is." Evander leaned back in his chair, looking almost pleased. "The prophecy everyone knows is only half the story. An Omega born under a blood moon can break the curse during the eclipse, yes. But the scroll specifies 2 methods. The first is voluntary union with her true mate under the eclipse moon. The bond between fated mates, sealed during the celestial event, generates enough power to shatter the curse. And the second?" Calder's voice was dangerously soft. "Ritual sacrifice." Evander said it without emotion, as if discussing crop yields. The Omega's life force, channeled correctly during the eclipse, transfers her inherent power to the one performing the ritual. That person then has the strength to break the curse and gain significant additional power in the process. Rhiannon felt the blood drain from her face. "You were going to kill me." Evander finally looked at her directly. "I was going to save the kingdom. The curse is killing us all slowly. Crops failing, children dying, our wolves weakening. The eclipse is in 3 days. 3 days to either save everyone or watch them continue to suffer. The sacrifice of one life to save thousands seemed a reasonable trade." "Reasonable?" Calder's voice cracked like a whip. "You kidnapped an innocent woman, chained her with silver, and planned to murder her, and you call that reasonable? I call it pragmatic." Evander's mask of calm finally cracked, revealing the zealot underneath. "You're too soft, Calder. Always have been. Your father understood the hard choices leadership requires, but you shy away from them. I found the solution to our kingdom's greatest crisis, and I was prepared to do what you wouldn't, by stealing my mate and killing her." The words came out as a growl. Evander's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. "Your mate? Well, I suppose that's poetic irony. If I'd known, I might have chosen differently. But perhaps not. After all, if she dies in the ritual, you'd be free to find another mate. One more suitable for a king." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Calder moved with supernatural speed, crossing the distance between them and grabbing Evander by the throat before anyone could react. "Give me one reason," Calder snarled, his eyes flashing gold. "Why I shouldn't kill you right now." Evander didn't struggle, didn't show fear, because you need to know the rest. "The ritual I planned wasn't just about saving the kingdom. The power gained from the sacrifice would have made me strong enough to challenge you for the throne. I was going to save Greymont and take my rightful place as its leader." The honesty of it, the complete lack of remorse, seemed to shock Calder into releasing him. He stepped back, disgust written clearly across his features. "You betrayed me for ambition. Not loyalty to the kingdom. Not some greater good. You wanted power. I wanted to not be second anymore," Evander said simply. 10 years serving at your side, watching you make soft choices, watching the kingdom deteriorate because you refused to make hard decisions. I could have been a better king. I would have been. Calder turned away from him, looking at the guards. "Take him back to the dungeons. Triple the watch. If he escapes, everyone responsible will answer to me personally." The guards hauled Evander to his feet and dragged him toward the door. The beta didn't resist, but he did call back over his shoulder. "You'll see, Calder. When the eclipse comes and you're forced to choose between your precious honor and your dying kingdom, you'll understand why I did this." Then he was gone, and Calder stood staring at the closed door, his shoulders tight with tension. Rhiannon found her voice. "Is it true? What he said about the prophecy?" Calder turned to her, his expression weary. "If this scroll is genuine, then yes. 2 paths to breaking the curse. Voluntary union with a fated mate during the eclipse, or ritual sacrifice. And I'm the Omega from the prophecy. It seems so. Born during a blood moon eclipse 24 years ago, marked with the crescent amber eyes, natural affinity for healing. You match every criterion." Rhiannon pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly feeling very small. "So my choices are to either marry a stranger or be sacrificed to break a curse I didn't know existed until yesterday." "No." Calder's voice was firm. He crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, putting himself at her eye level. "Your choice is whether you want to stay or leave. That's all. I won't force you to participate in any ritual. I won't pressure you to accept the mate bond. And I absolutely will not allow anyone to harm you." "But the kingdom is my responsibility, not yours. We've survived this curse for 3 years. We'll find another way if necessary." His brown eyes were steady, sincere. "You've already suffered too much because of prophecies and politics. I won't add to that, even though I could save your people. Not at the cost of your freedom or your life. Never that." Rhiannon studied his face, searching for deception or manipulation. But all she saw was exhaustion and a kind of determined protectiveness that made her chest ache. "There are laws," Calder continued quietly. "Ancient laws for dealing with traitors. The worst crime a shifter can commit is betraying their alpha and their pack. The punishment is removal of the wolf itself. Through a ritual called the rite of removal, the wolf spirit is permanently severed from the human. It's considered a fate worse than death. Will you do that to Evander? I should. He's earned it, but that decision can wait. Calder stood, giving her space. Right now, you need to recover and decide what you want. You can leave Greymont with an escort and enough resources to start a new life anywhere you choose, or you can stay here as my guest, under my protection, and take time to understand what's happened and what the mate bond means. No pressure, no obligations, just safety and time to heal. How long until the eclipse? 3 days. 3 days to decide if she trusted this stranger with kind eyes and a mate bond she didn't fully understand. 3 days to determine if she was willing to tie her fate to a kingdom she'd never cared about and a prophecy she'd never asked to fulfill. Or 3 days to run as far and fast as she could and let someone else deal with curses and destiny. Rhiannon looked at the burns on her wrists, at the marks Evander had left on her. She'd spent 6 weeks in darkness, helpless and afraid. The idea of having control again, of making her own choices, was almost overwhelming. I'll stay, she heard herself say. At least for now. I want to understand what's happening, and she touched the back of her neck, where that strange burning sensation still pulsed faintly. I want to understand this bond. Something that might have been relief crossed Calder's face. Thank you. I'll have fresh clothing brought for you and food. Real food. As much as you can manage. The healer will return tomorrow to check your wounds, and if you need anything at all, just ask. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. Not because of the prophecy or the curse, just because I'd like the chance to know you. Then he was gone, leaving Rhiannon alone with her thoughts, and a decision that felt far too large for her to carry. But she had 3 days. 3 days to figure out if destiny was real, if mate bonds could be trusted, and if she was brave enough to face an eclipse that might change everything. Chapter 4. Threads of Allegiance. Rhiannon woke to soft voices outside the chamber door, and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the room. Her body ached less than it had the day before. The burns on her wrists and ankles reduced to a dull throb, rather than the searing agony she'd endured for weeks. When she flexed her fingers, they responded without trembling. Progress. Small, but real. Lady Mora entered carrying a tray laden with food. Soft cheese, sliced apples, honey, and thick slices of bread still warm from the ovens. Behind her came Constance, the healer, her experienced eyes already assessing Rhiannon from across the room. Good morning, Constance said briskly. Let me see those wounds. Rhiannon extended her arms obediently, while the healer unwrapped the bandages and examined the healing burns. The older woman made approving sounds, nodding to herself as she applied fresh salve. Much better. The infection has cleared completely. You're healing faster than most would after prolonged silver contact. Constance rewrapped the wounds with clean linen. Keep eating, keep resting, and you'll be on your feet properly within another day. I feel stronger already, Rhiannon admitted. That's your wolf recovering. She took the brunt of the damage. Constance packed away her supplies. His Majesty asked me to tell you he'll return this afternoon. He's been in council meetings since dawn. After the healer and Lady Mora departed, Rhiannon ate slowly, savoring each bite. Real food, not the meager scraps Evander had brought. Her stomach protested the richness at first, but she forced herself to eat small amounts, knowing her body needed the nourishment. By the time Calder arrived in the early afternoon, she'd managed to dress herself in the clean gown Lady Mora had left, and was sitting in the chair by the window, watching the castle grounds below. You look better, he said from the doorway. She turned. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his hair tied back hastily, as if he'd run his hands through it too many times during whatever meetings had consumed his morning. You look worse, she replied honestly. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Honest as always. He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. How do you feel? Like I might not fall over if I try to walk, which is an improvement. Would you like to test that theory? If you're up to it, I'd like to show you the castle. The real castle. not just these four walls. Rhiannon considered. The idea of leaving the safety of this room made her nervous, but she was also desperately curious about the kingdom she'd supposedly been prophesied to save. All right. But if I collapse dramatically, you're carrying me back. Fair agreement. They moved slowly through the corridors, Calder matching his pace to hers. Rhiannon was intensely aware of the people they passed. Servants who bowed, guards who straightened to attention, nobles who watched with barely concealed curiosity. She kept her chin up, refusing to shrink under their stares. They're wondering who you are, Calder said quietly, as they descended a wide stone staircase. What are you telling them? That you're under my protection. That's all anyone needs to know for now. They emerged into the great hall, and Rhiannon's breath caught. The space was massive, with high vaulted ceilings and tapestries depicting wolves running beneath full moons. Trestle tables lined the sides, and an enormous hearth dominated one wall, large enough to roast an entire deer. But it was the view through the far doors that truly captured her attention. Beyond them lay gardens, and even from here she could see they were struggling. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the doors. Calder led her outside. The gardens had once been beautiful. She could see the ghost of it in the layout, in the carefully planned paths and ornate trellises. Now, most everything was dead or dying. Withered rose bushes, cracked fountains, grass gone brown and brittle. The curse's fingerprints were everywhere. Yet here and there, stubborn life persisted. A patch of wild violets near a stone bench, moss clinging to the shaded side of a wall, one gnarled apple tree that still held a handful of green leaves. "My mother loved these gardens," Calder said softly. She could name every plant, knew which ones needed sun and which preferred shade. When the curse took hold, this was one of the first places to show it. Rhiannon moved between the dead flower beds, her fingers trailing over brittle stems. She closed her eyes, reaching out with that subtle sense Edith had helped her develop over years of working with injured animals. The land was muted, struggling to breathe, but underneath the oppression of the curse, she could feel a desperate desire to live, to grow, to flourish again. "It's not dead," she murmured, "just trapped, waiting." When she opened her eyes, Calder was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Can you feel the curse itself?" "Not exactly. I feel the absence it creates. Like something is smothering everything." She approached the lone apple tree and placed her palm against its rough bark. The connection was immediate, that faint pulse of life answering her touch. But this time, something else happened. The warmth at the back of her neck, where the mate mark burned, seemed to travel down her arm and into the tree. One of the wilted leaves near her hand lifted slightly, as if catching a breath of wind. Rhiannon pulled her hand back, startled. "Did you see that?" "I did." Calder stepped closer, examining the leaf. "What did you do?" "I don't know. At home, with animals. It was always small things. Calming a frightened dog, easing an old horse's pain. But this felt stronger, more intentional. Perhaps the mate bond is amplifying what was already there," Calder said thoughtfully. "Or you're stronger than you knew." Before Rhiannon could respond, rapid footsteps approached. A guard appeared, breathing hard, his face flushed. "Your Majesty. Urgent news from the dungeons." Calder's expression hardened. "What happened?" The prisoner Evander attempted to bribe one of the younger guards to pass a message. The guard reported it immediately. "We searched his cell and found evidence he'd been communicating with someone outside the dungeons. Coded messages, partially destroyed. Who?" The single word came out as a growl. "We're not certain yet, but based on the fragments we recovered, it appears to be Lord Percival and Lady Meredith. Possibly others." Calder's jaw tightened. "Assemble the council. I want every piece of that message reconstructed. Search Percival and Meredith's quarters immediately. If they're conspiring with Evander, I want to know the extent of it." The guard bowed and left at a run. Rhiannon's chest constricted. "He still has allies. So it seems." Calder turned to her, his eyes grave. "This changes things. If there's a faction supporting Evander's goals, they may try to act during the eclipse. We'll need to increase security significantly." Over the next hour, While Calder dealt with the unfolding crisis, Rhiannon found herself in a smaller courtyard where members of the King's Guard trained. Lady Mora had appeared, gently suggesting that His Majesty would prefer Rhiannon remain somewhere protected while he handled the security matter. The warriors moved through their drills with precision, but Rhiannon noticed something was off. Several of them moved stiffly, favoring injuries or showing signs of exhaustion. The curse was affecting them too, making healing slower, sapping their strength. One young guard stumbled during a sword drill, his leg buckling beneath him. He caught himself quickly, shame coloring his face as his training partner called for a break. Rhiannon approached slowly. "May I?" The young guard looked up, confused. "My lady, your leg. Old injury?" He nodded hesitantly. "Training accident 3 months ago. It healed, but since the curse worsened, it's been weak. May I try something? I was a healer's apprentice." The guard glanced at his companions, then shrugged. "Can't hurt worse than it already does." Rhiannon knelt and placed her hand gently on his calf where the muscle was clearly strained. She closed her eyes and reached for that subtle connection, the way she had with injured animals countless times before. This time, with her wolf stronger and the mate bond humming at the base of her neck. The sensation was more powerful. She could feel the damage in his leg, not just the old injury, but the way the curse had prevented proper healing, leaving weak spots and inflammation. She focused on soothing, on calming, on encouraging what wanted to heal, but couldn't quite manage it alone. The guard inhaled sharply. "What?" "Hold still," she murmured. Warmth flowed through her palm, not hot, but gentle, persistent. After several long moments, she released her hold and sat back, slightly dizzy. The guard stood carefully, testing his weight. His eyes widened. "It doesn't hurt. It's been 3 months, and it just doesn't hurt." Word spread quickly. Within minutes, other guards were approaching, asking tentatively if she could help with their own lingering injuries. Rhiannon worked her way through several of them, easing pain where she could, strengthening what the curse had weakened. Each time it came more easily, as if a door that had been cracked open was now swinging wider. By the time Calder returned, she was surrounded by guards who looked at her with something approaching awe. He took in the scene with raised eyebrows. What happened here? The first guard she'd helped stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the lady has healing hands. Real healing. She helped 6 of us with injuries we've been carrying for months." Calder looked at Rhiannon, questions in his eyes. She stood on shaky legs. "I just helped a little. Nothing dramatic." "Nothing dramatic?" one of the other guards echoed with a disbelieving laugh. "My shoulder hasn't moved properly since that skirmish last winter. Now it's like it never happened." Calder's expression shifted to something complicated. Hope, concern, protectiveness, all mixed together. He crossed to Rhiannon and took her arm gently. "You need to rest. You're exhausted." She was. The work had drained her more than she'd realized, and her legs felt unsteady. As they walked back toward the royal chambers, Calder spoke quietly. "That was dangerous. Using your gift so freely when we don't fully understand it yet." They were hurting. I could help. How is that dangerous? Because now everyone knows what you can do, including Evander's allies, whoever they are. He glanced at her. "I'm not angry, just worried. If people see you as a tool that can be used, they'll try to use you." "Then help me understand what I am," Rhiannon said. "Because I felt something today that I've never felt before. My gift has always been subtle, gentle, but with the mate bond, with your wolves around me, it's stronger. I don't know if that's good or terrifying." They reached his chambers, and Calder helped her to the chair by the fire. She sank into it gratefully. "The investigation is ongoing," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "But it's clear Evander had help planning this. Lord Percival and Lady Meredith are being questioned. We found evidence of correspondence discussing the prophecy and ways to ensure the right outcome. It seems there's a faction of nobles who supported Evander's plan, either because they believed in it or because they saw opportunity in the chaos. How many? At least 6, possibly more. Not all of them were acting out of malice. Some genuinely believed sacrificing you was the kingdom's only hope." His jaw tightened. They're wrong. Rhiannon pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. The eclipse is in 2 days. I know. What happens if we do nothing? If I choose to leave? If there's no ritual at all? Calder was quiet for a long moment. The curse continues. More people die. The kingdom slowly withers until there's nothing left to save. He met her eyes. But that's not your burden to carry alone. This is my kingdom, my responsibility. I've been searching for answers for 3 years. If this doesn't work, I'll keep searching. Even though I could end it now, if I agreed to the union ritual, even then, because your life matters as much as anyone else's in this kingdom, I won't buy our salvation with your freedom. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Rhiannon felt the mate bond pulse warmly at the base of her neck, responding to the sincerity in his voice. I'm not saying no, she said quietly. But I'm not saying yes either. Not yet. That's all I ask. Time to decide freely, without pressure. They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon light faded into evening. Outside, Rhiannon could hear the castle preparing for nightfall. Gates closing, watch changes being called, the distant sounds of the evening meal being prepared. Somewhere below, in the dungeons, Evander sat in his cell, still plotting. Somewhere in the castle, his allies waited for their chance to act. And in 2 days, the moon would darken, and a choice would have to be made. But for now, in this moment, Rhiannon allowed herself to simply exist, to feel the warmth of the fire, the steady presence of the man across from her, and the growing certainty that whatever she decided, she wouldn't be making that decision alone. The mate bond hummed between them, a promise neither had asked for but both were beginning to accept. Chapter 5. The Choice. The next day dawned cold and clear, the kind of morning where frost painted intricate patterns on the windows and every breath misted in the air. Rhiannon woke early, her mind already racing despite her body's protests. The eclipse was tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word felt too small for the weight it carried. She dressed slowly, her fingers still clumsy on the laces of the borrowed gown, and made her way to the window. Below, the castle grounds were already bustling with activity. Guards drilling in formation, servants hurrying between buildings, and everywhere she looked, the signs of preparation. For what exactly she wasn't certain. A ritual? A battle? Both? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. Calder entered, carrying a tray himself rather than sending Lady Mora. He looked as tired as she felt, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept little if at all. I thought you might want breakfast before the council meeting, he said, setting the tray on the small table by the fire. Rhiannon's stomach tightened. Council meeting? I need to present options to my advisors. The eclipse is tomorrow night, and whatever we decide to do, or not do, requires preparation. He gestured to the chair. I'd like you there. Not as the Omega from the prophecy, but as someone with a voice in what happens next. The idea of facing a room full of nobles and warriors, all of them expecting her to save their kingdom, made her want to hide under the bed. But Calder's expression held no pressure, only patient invitation. All right, she said quietly. I'll come. They ate in companionable silence, and then Calder led her through the castle corridors to a chamber she hadn't seen before. The council room was smaller than she'd expected, with a long table surrounded by high-backed chairs. Tapestries depicting the history of Greymont covered the walls, and a fire crackled in the hearth. 12 people were already seated when they entered. Rhiannon recognized none of them, but the way they all stood immediately told her these were important figures. Alphas from various territories, senior advisors, military commanders. Be seated, Calder said, moving to the head of the table. He guided Rhiannon to the chair at his right hand, a position of honor that made every eye in the room fix on her with renewed intensity. An older alpha with silver threading his dark hair spoke first. Your Majesty, if we might have an introduction? This is Rhiannon of Millbrook, Calder said. She is under my protection and is here at my invitation. Treat her with the same respect you would show me. The words carried weight, and several council members exchanged meaningful glances. They might not know about the mate bond yet, but they understood that the Alpha King didn't make declarations like that lightly. Calder continued, You all know why we're here. The eclipse is tomorrow night. We have a decision to make regarding the prophecy and how, or if, we act on it. Surely there's no question, a woman in military dress said sharply. We have the Omega. We have the prophecy. We perform the ritual and save the kingdom. It's not that simple, Commander Petra, Calder replied. There are two versions of the ritual, the one Evander planned. Was blood magic and treason? Another council member interrupted. We're not discussing that option. No, we're not, Calder agreed. But we need to discuss the other path. The voluntary union between fated mates during the eclipse. He paused, letting the words settle. Rhiannon is my mate. The bond formed 2 days ago when I found her imprisoned in Evander's chambers. Shocked silence filled the room. Then everyone tried to speak at once. Your mate? The timing is too convenient. This changes everything. Enough. Calder's voice cut through the chaos with alpha authority. The mate bond is not something that can be faked or forced. It simply is. But that doesn't mean we have the right to demand Rhiannon participate in a ritual she doesn't fully understand or consent to freely. Commander Petra leaned forward. With respect, Your Majesty, thousands of lives are at stake. The Omega's personal comfort seems a small price. Her name is Rhiannon. Calder interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. And she is not a price to be paid. She is a person who was kidnapped, chained, and nearly murdered for a prophecy she never asked to fulfill. We will not repeat Evander's mistakes by treating her as a tool. The commander sat back, chastened but clearly frustrated. The older alpha spoke again, his tone more measured. Perhaps the lady should speak for herself. Rhiannon, do you understand what the prophecy requires? All eyes turned to her. Rhiannon's throat felt tight, but she forced herself to meet their gazes. I understand that there's a ritual, that it requires Calder and I to complete the mate bond fully during the eclipse. Exchange of vows, claiming marks, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Consummation. That the power generated by that union should be strong enough to break the curse. Should be, someone muttered. Not exactly a guarantee. Nothing about this is guaranteed, Rhiannon said, finding her voice growing stronger. But you're asking me to bind my life to someone I met 2 days ago. To accept a mate bond I don't fully understand. To perform a ritual in front of witnesses that should be private and sacred. All based on a prophecy that might be wrong. And if you refuse? Another council member asked. What then? Then we keep searching for another way, Calder said firmly. As we have been for 3 years. We don't have 3 years. Commander Petra slammed her hand on the table. We have 1 night, 1 chance. If we waste it because of misplaced nobility, enough. Calder's eyes flashed gold. I will not force my mate into anything. That is final. If you cannot accept that, you may leave this council. The room fell silent again, tension thick enough to taste. The older alpha cleared his throat. Your Majesty, perhaps a compromise. We prepare for the ritual, gather the necessary witnesses, secure the location, ensure the ceremony can proceed safely if the decision is made to go forward. But the final choice remains with Rhiannon, made freely, without coercion. Does that seem reasonable? Calder looked at Rhiannon. What do you think? She appreciated that he asked, that he gave her agency even here, in front of his most powerful advisors. That seems fair. But I need time alone with Calder, to talk honestly, without an audience, before I can make any decision. Granted, the older alpha said. We'll prepare for every contingency. Your Majesty, we'll need details about security given Evander's allies are still at large. The meeting shifted to logistics, guard rotations, the location for the potential ritual, contingency plans if Evander's conspirators tried to interfere. Rhiannon listened, overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. This wasn't just about her and Calder. It was about an entire kingdom holding its breath, waiting to see if 2 strangers could save them. When the council finally dismissed, Calder took her arm gently. Come. There's somewhere private we can talk. He led her to a small chamber off the main library, clearly a reading room rarely used. Books lined the walls, and 2 comfortable chairs sat near a window that overlooked the gardens. He closed the door, and suddenly they were alone with the choice hanging between them. I'm sorry you had to sit through that, Calder said. moving to the window. Some of them see you as the answer to all our problems. They don't understand what they're asking. They're desperate, Rhiannon said. I can't blame them for that. No, but I can blame them for forgetting you're a person, not a prophecy. He turned to face her. Talk to me honestly. How do you feel about the mate bond? About me? The question was so direct it stole her breath. I don't know. I feel the pull. When you're near, something in me settles. When you touch me, even accidentally, it's like every nerve in my body wakes up. But I don't know if that's real or just magic, forcing me to feel something that isn't genuine. And if it is real, if the bond is showing you what could be, rather than forcing something false, Rhiannon moved to stand beside him at the window. Below, she could see the dead gardens, the struggling apple tree, the evidence of a kingdom in crisis. Then I'm terrified, because real feelings can hurt worse than magical ones. Real feelings mean I could lose something that actually matters. You're afraid of being hurt, Calder said softly. Aren't you? He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, I've been alone since my parents died, focused entirely on trying to save the kingdom, never allowing myself to want anything for myself. And then you appeared. And suddenly I want things I never let myself imagine. I want time to know you properly. I want to hear you laugh. I want to show you Greymont when it's healthy and whole. He stopped himself. But wanting isn't enough. You deserve choice. Rhiannon's chest ached. What if I said yes? What if I agreed to the ritual? Then we'd perform it together, and whatever happens afterward, I would spend the rest of my life making sure you never regretted that choice. And if I said no, then I'd help you leave Greymont safely, give you resources to start anywhere you wanted, and keep searching for another way to break the curse. His brown eyes held hers steadily. I would miss you. The mate bond doesn't just disappear because we ignore it, but I would respect your decision. You'd let me go, even though it might doom your kingdom? I'd let you go because keeping you against your will would doom me far worse than any curse. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. The bond is real, Rhiannon. What I feel for you, even after only 2 days, is real. But real doesn't mean you owe me anything. It just means I'm asking you to consider what we could be, if you're willing to try. The warmth of his hand in hers sent that familiar electricity up her arm. The mate bond pulsed at the base of her neck, stronger now, insistent. Her wolf, which had been quiet and recovering for so long, stirred with longing. I'm afraid, she admitted. The last time I trusted someone in power, I ended up chained in a cell. I know, and I can't undo what Evander did to you. All I can do is show you, day by day, that I'm not him, that I will never be him. Calder's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. But if you need more time than we have, if tomorrow is too soon, then we find another way, even if that means the eclipse passes without us. Rhiannon closed her eyes, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions. Fear, hope, attraction, duty, desire, uncertainty. They all warred inside her, making it impossible to think clearly. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Anything. Do you believe in the prophecy? Really believe it? Calder considered. I believe something brought you here. Whether that's fate or chance or the moon goddess herself, I don't know. But I believe our bond is meant for something. Whether that something is saving the kingdom or just teaching me to care about more than duty, I'm not sure. But yes, I believe. Then I need to tell you what I feel, Rhiannon said, opening her eyes. I feel the bond. I feel drawn to you in ways that terrify me, because they're so intense. I look at you, and I see someone who could matter more than anyone ever has. But I also feel trapped, by the prophecy, by the timing, by the fact that an entire kingdom is depending on me to make a choice that should be mine alone. What would you choose if the kingdom wasn't watching, if it was just us? The question hit her squarely in the chest. What would she choose? She thought of Millbrook, of the quiet life she'd planned, of helping Edith with her healing work, of growing old in a place where everyone knew her name. That life felt safe, predictable, but when she looked at Calder, she saw something else. a future that was terrifying in its uncertainty, but also thrilling in its possibility. A mate who looked at her like she was precious, a man who'd rather lose his kingdom than force her hand. "I don't know," she whispered. "I need more time. Time we don't have." Calder nodded slowly. "Then let me make this easier. We prepare for the ritual. We go to the sacred grounds tomorrow night. And when the eclipse begins, I will ask you one more time. In that moment, with no council watching, no kingdom demanding, just you and me, I'll ask. And whatever you answer, I'll accept. Even if it means the curse continues, even then." The promise hung between them, heavy and honest. Rhiannon felt something in her chest ease, just slightly. Not the pressure disappearing entirely, but the suffocating weight of it lifting enough that she could breathe. "All right," she said. "We'll prepare, but I'm not promising anything beyond showing up. That's all I ask." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it sent heat racing through her veins. When he released her hand, she could still feel the phantom warmth of his mouth against her skin. They spent the rest of the day in careful preparation. Calder showed her the sacred grounds where the ritual would take place. An ancient stone altar in the castle gardens, carved with runes that predated Greymont itself. He explained what the ceremony would require, walking her through each step so there would be no surprises. As evening fell, they shared a quiet meal in his chambers. No grand feast, no formal dining hall, just the two of them, eating simple food and talking about inconsequential things. She told him about growing up in Millbrook, about Edith's terrible singing voice, and the time a wolf pup had gotten stuck in the well. He told her about learning to fight from his father, about the first time he'd shifted and accidentally destroyed his mother's favorite tapestry. For a few hours, they were just two people getting to know each other. The prophecy and the curse and the weight of tomorrow faded into background noise. When Rhiannon finally retired to bed, leaving Calder to his own chambers for propriety's sake, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The mate bond hummed steadily at the base of her neck, a constant reminder of the choice looming tomorrow. She thought of the struggling apple tree in the garden, of the way it had responded to her touch. She thought of the guards she'd helped, the way her power had flowed more freely than ever before. She thought of Calder's steady brown eyes, and the way he'd promised to accept whatever she decided. Tomorrow, the moon would darken. Tomorrow, she would stand at that ancient altar. Tomorrow she would have to choose. But tonight, lying in the darkness with the mate bond pulsing warmly against her skin, Rhiannon allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to say yes, to accept the bond, the man, the terrifying possibility of a future she'd never planned. And for the first time since Evander had dragged her from her village, she felt something that wasn't quite hope, but was close to it. Tomorrow would come. And when it did, she would be ready to face it. Chapter 6. Eclipse. The day of the eclipse arrived with unsettling stillness. No birds sang in the skeletal trees, no wind stirred the dead grass. The sky stretched overhead in pale, cloudless blue, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Rhiannon woke before dawn, her stomach twisted in knots. Today, the choice she'd been circling for days would finally have to be made. She dressed in the ceremonial gown Lady Mora had brought the night before, simple white linen embroidered with silver thread in patterns of moons and wolves. It was beautiful in its simplicity, and wearing it made everything feel terrifyingly real. Constance arrived to check her wounds one final time. The burns had healed to pale pink scars, still tender but no longer painful. "You're stronger than most," the healer said, rewrapping them with clean bandages. "Whatever happens today, your body can handle it." If only her heart felt as certain. Calder came for her as the sun reached its peak. He wore formal attire, dark leather and wool embroidered with the crest of Greymont, a silver wolf howling beneath a full moon. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp planes of his face and the exhaustion in his eyes. He looked like a king preparing for battle. "The sacred grounds are ready," he said quietly. "Guards are positioned throughout the gardens. My most trusted warriors. No one who showed any sympathy to Evander's cause. Do you think they'll try something? His allies? I think desperate people do desperate things, but we're prepared. He offered his hand. Are you ready? No. Yes. She didn't know, but she placed her hand in his anyway. They walked through the castle in silence, trailed by a small escort of guards. Servants stopped their work to watch them pass. Hope and fear mingled in their expressions. The weight of an entire kingdom's expectations pressed down on Rhiannon's shoulders with every step. The sacred grounds lay at the heart of the gardens, where the paths converged around the ancient stone altar. It was a massive slab of granite carved with runes so old no one remembered their original meaning. The stone seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving the whole area an otherworldly quality. A small group waited there. The council members from yesterday, Commander Petra and her second-in-command, and perhaps a dozen guards forming a protective perimeter. Conspicuously absent were Lord Percival and Lady Meredith, still confined to their quarters under guard. The older Alpha, who Rhiannon had learned was named Lord Edmund, stepped forward. Your Majesty, Lady Rhiannon, the preparations are complete. We await only the eclipse. Calder nodded. How long? 3 hours until it begins. Full totality should last approximately 7 minutes. 7 minutes to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. Rhiannon's breath came shallow and quick. There's a chamber where you can wait privately, Lord Edmund continued, gesturing to a small stone building at the edge of the grounds. We'll alert you when the moon begins to darken. The chamber was simple, a meditation space used by priests and healers for centuries. A bench, a small altar with candles, and a window that looked out toward the sacred grounds. Calder dismissed the guards who'd accompanied them, leaving the two of them alone. How are you feeling? He asked. Like I might be sick, Rhiannon admitted. Or faint. Possibly both. He managed a small smile. That's fair. He moved to the window, looking out at the altar where they would stand, if she chose to go through with it. I meant what I said yesterday. This is your choice. Right up until the last moment, you can walk away. And doom your kingdom. The kingdom will survive or it won't. But I will not build our future on your coercion. Rhiannon joined him at the window. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. Soon, the moon would cross its path, and darkness would fall in the middle of the day. Tell me about the claiming marks, she said. What exactly happens? Calder's jaw tightened slightly. It's instinctive, driven by the wolf. I would bite here. He gestured to the junction of her neck and shoulder, leaving a permanent mark that identifies you as my mate. You would do the same to me. The marks are visible to other shifters, a sign of the bond between us. And it hurts? For a moment, but the pain fades quickly, replaced by the completion of the bond. He paused. Rhiannon, if we do this, it's permanent. There's no breaking a true mate bond once it's fully sealed. You need to understand that. I know. She did know, intellectually. But knowing and truly understanding were different things. What happens after? After the ritual completes? If the prophecy is true, your power combined with the mate bond should generate enough energy to break the curse. The land will heal. The sickness will fade. Greymont will recover. He turned to look at her directly. And you and I will be bound for life, whatever that life looks like. The magnitude of it threatened to overwhelm her. She moved away from the window, pacing the small chamber. I keep thinking about Millbrook, about Edith, about the life I planned. It was small and quiet and safe. Do you want that life? I don't know anymore. A week ago, absolutely. But now, she touched the back of her neck where the mate mark burned steadily. Now I don't know if I could go back to that, even if I tried. Everything has changed. Before Calder could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Commander Petra's voice came through. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Calder opened the door immediately. What is it? One of the perimeter guards found evidence of tampering with the gate to the sacred grounds. Someone tried to force the lock within the last hour. Calder's expression darkened. Evander? Still secured in the dungeons, triple-checked. But his allies are another matter. Lord Percival's guards reported he attempted to bribe them for release. When that failed, he tried to force the door. We've moved him to a more secure location, but if they're making moves now, They'll try something during the eclipse, Calder finished. When we're most vulnerable. Double the guard. No one gets near these grounds who isn't on the approved list. And search every person entering, including the council members. Commander Petra saluted and left to implement the orders. Calder turned back to Rhiannon. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have to make this choice while worrying about an attack. It's not your fault. Though her stomach had twisted even tighter at the news. Do you think they'll actually try to stop the ritual? I think they'll try to complete Evander's original plan. Kidnap you. Perform the sacrifice during the eclipse. His hands clenched into fists. But they'll have to go through me first. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Rhiannon tried to eat the food Lady Mora brought, but managed only a few bites. Calder paced like a caged wolf, his tension feeding her own. Outside the window, the sun continued its descent, and the guards on the sacred grounds grew more alert with each passing minute. Finally, as shadows began to lengthen across the gardens, Lord Edmund appeared at the door. Your Majesty, the moon is beginning to cross the sun. It's time. Rhiannon's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. No more waiting, no more deliberating. The moment had arrived. Calder looked at her, his brown eyes searching. What do you choose? She thought of the struggling apple tree, of the guards she'd helped heal, of the desperate hope in the faces of the people who'd watched her pass through the castle. She thought of Edith teaching her to soothe frightened animals, of growing up knowing she was different, of always feeling like she was waiting for something without knowing what. She thought of Calder's steady presence, of the way he'd given her choice when he could have demanded compliance, of the mate bond humming between them like a living thing. I choose you, she heard herself say. I choose us. I choose to try. Relief and fear and hope crashed across Calder's face all at once. Are you certain? No. But I'm choosing anyway. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. Then we face this together. They walked out into the fading light. The sun hung low on the horizon, and above it, the moon had begun its slow crossing. Already, the light had taken on a strange quality, dimmer but sharper somehow, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. The witnesses stood in a semicircle around the altar, their faces solemn. Commander Petra and her warriors held the perimeter, eyes scanning the tree line and the castle walls for any sign of threat. Calder led Rhiannon to the altar. Lord Edmund stepped forward, holding an ancient text bound in leather. We gather as the moon crosses the sun, he intoned, his voice carrying across the silent gardens. To witness a bond sealed, a prophecy fulfilled, a kingdom's hope renewed. Alpha King Calder of Greymont and Rhiannon of Millbrook, you stand before the sacred stone as fated mates. Do you come here of your own free will? I do, Calder said firmly. Rhiannon's voice came out quieter but steady. I do. Then speak your vows as the darkness falls. Above them, the moon continued its inexorable path. The light dimmed further, the world taking on a twilight quality, though it was barely evening. Rhiannon could feel power gathering in the air, ancient and patient. Calder turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Rhiannon, I vow to honor your choices above my own desires. I vow to protect you with my life and my kingdom. I vow to see you as a person first, a queen second, and a prophecy never. Whatever time we have, I will spend it proving you made the right choice. Tears burned in Rhiannon's eyes. She swallowed hard and found her voice. Calder, I vow to face this future with courage even when I'm terrified. I vow to trust you with my heart, even though it scares me. I vow to be your partner, your mate, and your equal. Whatever comes, we face it together. The moon covered half the sun now. Shadows grew long and strange. The temperature dropped perceptibly. The claiming marks, Lord Edmund said softly. Calder's eyes flashed gold as his wolf rose close to the surface. He stepped closer, and Rhiannon tilted her head, exposing her neck. Her heart raced so fast she thought it might burst. I'm sorry if this hurts, Calder murmured. Then his mouth was on her neck, and she felt the sharp pressure of teeth breaking skin. Pain lanced through her, bright and shocking, but it lasted only a moment before transforming into something else entirely. Heat flooded the bite, spreading through her veins like liquid fire. The mate mark on the back of her neck blazed, and suddenly she could feel Calder's emotions as clearly as her own. His fear, his hope, his fierce protectiveness, his desperate love. He pulled back, and she saw blood on his lips. Her blood. The mark on her shoulder burned and throbbed and felt completely right. "Your turn," he said, his voice rough. Rhiannon's wolf surged forward, stronger than it had been since the silver chains. She felt her canines lengthen, sharpen. Calder bent his head, and she bit down on the same spot she'd marked. The junction of his neck and shoulder. His blood filled her mouth, copper and salt and something indefinably him. Power rushed through her, the bond between them snapping into place with such force she gasped. When she released him, they stood there bleeding and bound, the marks visible even in the dimming light. And then, chaos erupted. Explosion tore through the far wall of the garden, stone and earth flying in all directions. Warriors shouted, steel rang as swords were drawn, and through the dust and smoke came figures in dark clothing, their faces covered. "Protect the king and the Omega!" Commander Petra roared. But the attackers had numbers and desperation on their side. Rhiannon counted at least a dozen, maybe more, moving with coordinated precision toward the altar. These weren't amateur conspirators. They were trained fighters. Calder shoved Rhiannon behind him, his eyes fully gold now. "Stay close to me. Complete the ritual," Lord Edmund shouted over the sounds of fighting. "You must complete it before the eclipse passes." Above them, the moon covered 3/4 of the sun. They had minutes at best. Calder grabbed Rhiannon's hand. "We finish this. Here, now, together." The guards formed a barrier around them, fighting desperately to keep the attackers at bay. Rhiannon saw Commander Petra take down 2 assailants with brutal efficiency. Saw one of the young guards she'd healed defending the altar with fierce determination. And she saw, emerging from the smoke like a nightmare, Evander. His clothing was torn, his face bruised, but his eyes burned with manic determination. He'd escaped. Somehow, impossibly, he'd escaped. "You can't have her!" Evander shouted, charging forward. Calder met him halfway, the two of them colliding with bone-jarring force. They fought with savage intensity, Alpha against Beta, former friends turned bitter enemies. Rhiannon stood frozen on the altar, torn between helping and finishing the ritual. The eclipse was almost complete. If they didn't act now, a hand grabbed her arm. Lord Percival, his face twisted with fury. "You're coming with me, Omega. One way or another, this curse ends tonight." He hauled her toward the broken wall, toward the chaos and smoke. Rhiannon fought him, but he was stronger, and she was still weak from everything she'd endured. Then Calder was there, his claws extended, his wolf fully in control. He tore Percival away from her with such force, the man flew backward into the rubble. "Touch my mate again," Calder snarled, his voice barely human, "and I'll tear you apart." The moon covered the sun completely. Darkness fell across the gardens like a curtain dropping. Total eclipse. "Now!" Calder grabbed Rhiannon's hand and pulled her back to the altar. "We finish this now." The world had narrowed to just them, just this moment. The fighting continued around them, but felt distant, unimportant. The only thing that mattered was the bond between them and the power beginning to build in the air. Calder pulled her close, his bloodied mouth finding hers in a kiss that was desperate and claiming and full of promise. The mate bond roared to life, the claiming marks burning, and Rhiannon felt power surge through her unlike anything she'd ever experienced. It wasn't just her power or his. It was theirs, combined and amplified. The bond between them acting as a conduit for something ancient and primal. Light exploded from where they stood, golden and pure, radiating outward in waves. The curse shattered. Rhiannon felt it break, felt the suffocating weight that had pressed down on the land for 3 years, simply ceased to exist. The light swept across the gardens, and everywhere it touched, life returned. Dead roses bloomed instantly. Withered grass turned green. The fountain began to flow clear and strong. The light swept over the fighters, and Evander's allies dropped to their knees, their wolves forced into submission by the pure Omega power radiating from Rhiannon. The eclipse reached its peak, and in that moment of perfect darkness, Greymont was reborn. Then Rhiannon's legs gave out. The massive expenditure of power too much for her still recovering body. Calder caught her, holding her against his chest, as the light faded and the moon began to move past the sun. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you." Around them, the fighting had stopped. Evander lay unconscious, finally defeated. Lord Percival and the other conspirators were being bound by Commander Petra's warriors. The gardens bloomed with impossible life, proof that the curse was truly broken. And Rhiannon, held in the arms of her mate, felt the bond between them settle into place like a key turning in a lock. Complete, permanent, unbreakable. She'd made her choice, and there was no going back now. But looking up at Calder's face, seeing the fierce love and protectiveness in his eyes, she found she didn't want to. Chapter 7. Justice and Rebirth. Rhiannon woke in Calder's chambers, wrapped in silk sheets that smelled of cedar and something uniquely him. Her body ached in new ways, tender and sore, but not unpleasant. The claiming marks on her neck and shoulder throbbed with a steady warmth that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The bond. She could feel it now, fully formed and undeniable. Even with her eyes closed, she knew Calder stood by the window watching the sunrise. She could sense his emotions, relief, protectiveness, a bone-deep satisfaction, and underneath it all, concern for her. "I can feel you thinking," she murmured without opening her eyes. She heard him cross the room, felt the bed dip as he sat beside her. "How do you feel?" Rhiannon finally opened her eyes. He looked exhausted but content, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, the claiming mark she'd left on his neck visible above the collar of his shirt. "Like I used every bit of strength I had and then some. But alive, whole. The healer said you channeled more power during the ritual than should have been possible for an Omega your age. You broke a 3-year curse in 7 minutes." His hand found hers beneath the sheets, their fingers intertwining. "You were magnificent." Heat flooded her cheeks. Memories of the night before came in fragments. The eclipse, the explosion of power, and after, when the guards had escorted them back to the castle and Calder had carried her to his chambers. The ritual had needed to be completed fully, privately, and they had. The bond between them was now sealed in every way. "The gardens," she said. "Did it work? Is the curse really broken? Come see." He helped her to her feet, wrapping a robe around her shoulders before leading her to the window. Below, the castle grounds had transformed overnight. Where there had been dead earth and withered plants, now everything bloomed with vibrant life. Roses climbed the walls in riots of red and pink. The fountain in the center courtyard sparkled in the morning light, its water crystal clear. Even from here, she could see birds singing in trees that had been skeletal the day before. "It's beautiful," Rhiannon breathed. "Reports are coming in from across the kingdom. Crops that were dying are recovering. Sick wolves are healing. Children born weak are gaining strength." Calder's arm came around her waist, pulling her against his side. "You saved them all. We saved them. Together." She leaned into his warmth, marveling at how natural it felt. Yesterday she'd been terrified of this bond. Today, standing here with him, feeling his emotions as clearly as her own, it felt like the most right thing in the world. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Lady Mora entered at Calder's call, carrying fresh clothing and breakfast. Her eyes took in the claiming marks on both of them, and she smiled knowingly. "Your Majesty, my lady. The council requests your presence when you're ready. They've gathered the prisoners for judgment." Calder looked at Rhiannon. "Are you strong enough?" "I want to be there, to see this finished." An hour later, dressed in a gown of deep blue that Lady Mora had procured from somewhere, Rhiannon stood at Calder's side in the great hall. The space was packed with witnesses, council members, guards, citizens who'd been granted entry to see justice served. At the center, bound in iron chains, knelt 7 prisoners: Evander, Lord Percival, Lady Meredith, and 4 other nobles whose names Rhiannon had learned over the past hours. Lord Garrett, Lady Rosalind, Sir Tobias, and Baron Whitmore. All of them had supported Evander's plan. All had conspired to either sacrifice Rhiannon or stop the ritual from happening. Lord Edmund stood to address the assembly. These 7 stand accused of treason against the crown, conspiracy to commit murder, and actions that endangered the entire kingdom. Alpha King Calder as their judge. What say you? Calder's expression was hard as stone. Evander, you were my beta for 10 years, my father's trusted advisor before me. I gave you my faith, my friendship, my confidence, and you betrayed all of it for power. Evander lifted his head, his ice-blue eyes unrepentant. I did what you were too weak to do. The kingdom was dying, and you were too concerned with honor to make the hard choice. I found the solution. You found a way to commit murder and call it salvation. Calder cut him off. You kidnapped an innocent woman, chained her with silver, and planned to kill her. There is no honor in that. No justification. The curse is broken now because of what I did, Evander argued, his voice rising. I brought the Omega to you. Without me, she'd still be in that village, and Greymont would still be dying. Where's the justice in punishing the man who saved you all? You didn't save anyone. Rhiannon's voice rang clear across the hall. Every eye turned to her. You tortured me. You planned to murder me. The fact that things worked out differently doesn't absolve you of what you intended. Evander's expression twisted. You're alive, aren't you? You're queen now, bound to the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. You should be thanking me. The sheer audacity of it left her breathless. Before she could respond, Calder stepped forward, his presence radiating contained fury. Lord Percival, Lady Meredith, and the rest of you. What's your defense? Lord Percival lifted his chin defiantly. We believed in Evander's plan. The kingdom needed to be saved, and you were too sentimental to do what was necessary. We acted for the good of Greymont. You acted for power, Commander Petra said from her position near the prisoners. When we searched your chambers, we found correspondence detailing how you planned to divide territories once Evander took the throne. This wasn't about salvation. It was about advancement. Lies, Lady Meredith hissed. But her face had gone pale. Calder looked to the assembly. The law is clear. Treason against the crown, attempted murder of the Luna Queen, conspiracy to overthrow the rightful ruler. These crimes carry the death penalty. But I am offering an alternative, one that my mate suggested. He gestured to Lord Edmund, who produced an ancient scroll. The right of removal, a punishment reserved for the gravest betrayals. The ritual severs the wolf from the human permanently. You will live, but as humans only. No shift, no pack bond, no connection to the wolves you once commanded. Then you will be exiled beyond our borders with nothing but the clothes on your backs. Horror dawned on the prisoners' faces. For a shifter, losing their wolf was a fate worse than death. It meant losing half of themselves, becoming incomplete in a way that could never be healed. You can't, Evander said, his composure finally cracking. Calder, please, don't do this. You showed my mate no mercy. You planned to bleed her on an altar for power. Why should I show you what you denied her? Rhiannon touched Calder's arm, feeling his rage through the bond. May I speak? He nodded, and she stepped forward to address the prisoners directly. I should want you dead. After what you did, what you planned, I should demand your execution. But I won't. Not because you deserve mercy, but because I refuse to let you turn me into someone who takes life lightly. You'll live with what you've done, exiled and diminished. And every day you'll remember the choices that led you here. She turned to Calder. If it's within my authority as Luna Queen, I request the right of removal followed by permanent exile. It is within your authority, Lord Edmund confirmed. The Luna has equal voice in matters of justice. Calder looked at her for a long moment, something like pride shining in his eyes. Then he turned back to the assembly. Let it be done. The rite of removal will be performed at sunset. Witnesses from each major territory will attend to ensure it's carried out correctly. After the rite, the 7 will be escorted to the border and cast out. Your Majesty, no. Evander struggled against his chains. I served your father faithfully. I served you. This is too cruel. You chained my mate with silver for 6 weeks. Calder said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You locked her in darkness. You burned her with bonds that could have killed her. Do not speak to me of cruelty. The judgment was passed. Guards hauled the prisoners away to await their fate. As the hall cleared, Rhiannon felt the weight of the past week finally settling on her shoulders. It was done. The curse broken. The traitors condemned. Justice served. She sagged slightly, and Calder was there immediately, his arm supporting her. Too much? He asked softly. I'm all right. It's a lot. He guided her to a private antechamber off the main hall. Once they were alone, she let herself lean fully against him, feeling his strength steady her. Do you regret your choice? About the punishment? He asked. No. Death would have been easier for them, quicker. This way they live with the consequences. It feels more just. She pulled back to look at him. Do you think I'm being too soft? The council probably expected executions. I think you're being merciful without being weak. There's a difference. He cupped her face gently. You're going to make an exceptional queen. I don't feel like a queen. I feel like a girl from Millbrook who's very far from home. Then we'll make Greymont feel like home. However long it takes. That evening, Rhiannon stood beside Calder in the sacred grounds where they'd performed the ritual the night before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Before them knelt the 7 prisoners, surrounded by witnesses from every major territory in the kingdom. 3 Alpha Lords joined Calder in forming the ceremonial circle. The rite of removal was ancient, its words in a language that predated modern speech. Rhiannon watched as Calder and the other Alphas placed their hands on each prisoner in turn, speaking the words that would sever wolf from human. The prisoners screamed. The sound was horrible, full of anguish and loss that made Rhiannon's chest ache despite everything they'd done. One by one, she watched the light leave their eyes, that particular gleam that marked them as shifters. When it was done, they slumped in their bonds, looking hollow and diminished. Evander was last. When Calder placed his hand on the former Beta's head and spoke the words, Evander's scream carried across the gardens. It was a sound of absolute despair, of something fundamental being torn away. Then it was over. The 7 sat there, just human now, staring at nothing. Take them to the border, Calder commanded. Ensure they cross into neutral territory. If they ever return to Greymont, the sentence is death. Guards hauled the former conspirators away. The witnesses dispersed, speaking in hushed tones about the severity of the punishment and the justice of it. Rhiannon stood looking at the altar where she'd made her choice, where she'd accepted the bond and saved a kingdom. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been a day. Are you all right? Calder asked, coming to stand beside her. I keep thinking about Evander. How he could have had everything. Your trust, your friendship, a position of honor. And he threw it away for ambition. Some people will always want more than they have, no matter how much they're given. I don't want to become like that. To forget where I came from. To let power change who I am. Calder took her hand, his thumb tracing the mate mark on her wrist. Then we'll remind each other. When I get too focused on being king, you'll remind me to be Calder. When you feel lost in being queen, I'll remind you you're Rhiannon first. She looked up at him. This man who'd given her choice when he could have demanded compliance, who'd risked his kingdom rather than force her hand. I'm glad I chose you. I'm glad I chose this. So am I. He kissed her forehead gently. Come, there's something I want to show you. He led her through the blooming gardens to a section she hadn't seen before. There, thriving in the rich soil, was a herb patch. Rosemary, lavender, sage, thyme. Dozens of varieties growing in neat rows. I had the gardeners plant these this morning, Calder said. You told me Edith taught you about healing herbs. I thought you might want your own garden, a place that's yours, where you can practice what she taught you. Tears stung Rhiannon's eyes. You remembered. I remember everything you tell me. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I sent another message to Millbrook today, inviting Edith to visit when she's able. I thought you might like to show her what you've become. what you've accomplished. The thoughtfulness of it, the care he'd taken to connect her present to her past, overwhelmed her. Thank you for seeing me, for remembering what matters. You matter. Everything about you matters. They stood there as the sun set fully, surrounded by the garden that had been dead yesterday and was alive today. Rhiannon felt the mate bond humming between them, felt Calder's contentment and love flowing through it. She felt her own heart opening, accepting this new life, this new role, this new future. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but standing here with her mate, in a kingdom reborn, she found she didn't mourn what she'd lost. She was too busy embracing what she'd gained. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning to be a queen, helping the kingdom fully recover, building a life with Calder that was based on more than just prophecy and crisis. But tonight, as darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Rhiannon allowed herself to simply be content. The curse was broken, justice had been served, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Chapter 8. New Dawn. 6 months had passed since the eclipse, and Greymont had transformed so completely that sometimes Rhiannon had to remind herself it had ever been cursed at all. She stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, one hand resting on the stone balustrade, the other cradling the swell of her belly. 6 months pregnant, the healers had confirmed just last week, though she'd suspected for longer. The baby moved beneath her palm, a flutter of life that still amazed her every time she felt it. Below, the kingdom spread out in all its recovered glory. The gardens were a riot of color, roses, jasmine, and honeysuckle competing for space on every wall and trellis. Beyond the castle walls, she could see the fields golden with wheat ready for harvest, the forests green and full of game, and in the distance, smoke rising from village hearths where families gathered for the evening meal. The harvest had been record-breaking this year, more than enough to replenish stores depleted during the curse and trade with neighboring kingdoms. Birth rates among the wolves had tripled, with healthy pups born to packs across all territories. The sickness that had plagued the elderly and weak had vanished completely, as if it had never existed. Greymont was whole again, thriving, and Rhiannon, the girl from Millbrook who'd never imagined being anything more than a healer's apprentice, was its Luna Queen. "You're thinking too hard again." Calder's voice came from the doorway behind her. "I can feel it through the bond." She smiled without turning. "I'm thinking about how strange life is. 6 months ago I was chained in a cell. Now I'm carrying the heir to a kingdom." He crossed to her, his arms coming around her from behind, his hands settling over hers on her belly. The baby kicked against his palm, and she felt his wonder and joy through the mate bond as clearly as if he'd spoken it aloud. "Not strange," he murmured against her hair. "Miraculous." Rhiannon leaned back against his chest, savoring the warmth and solidity of him. The claiming marks they bore had long since healed into silvery scars, visible to other shifters as a sign of their bond. She touched hers absently, the way she often did when she needed to ground herself. Constance confirmed it this morning. "The baby is strong, healthy. She'll be born just after the winter solstice." Rhiannon turned in his arms to face him. "A daughter, Calder. We're having a daughter." His eyes shone. "I know. I've known since you told me you were pregnant. I could feel it somehow, through you. A girl." He cupped her face. "She's going to be just as stubborn and brave as her mother, and as protective and honorable as her father." Rhiannon rose on her toes to kiss him, a soft brush of lips that still sent warmth flooding through her veins. "Have you thought more about names?" "I have, but I want to hear yours first." They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks, both hesitant to be the first to make suggestions. Names carried weight in shifter culture, connecting a child to their lineage and their destiny. "I thought," Rhiannon said carefully, "that we might consider naming her after your mother, to honor what we've rebuilt." Calder was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "That's generous of you. But my mother had the kingdom. Our daughter will have something my mother never did, a peaceful, prosperous realm to grow up in, free from the burden of curses and loss. I want her name to reflect that. Something that means hope, or new beginning." "Aurora," Rhiannon suggested. "For the dawn, for new light after darkness." Aurora. He tested the name, and she watched his expression soften. Yes, Aurora of Greymont. Our daughter. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Lady Mora entered, her face bright with excitement. Your Majesty, my lady. The delegation from Millbrook has arrived. They're being received in the Great Hall. Rhiannon's heart leaped. Edith? She's with them, yes, along with several others from your village. Rhiannon had sent the invitation a month ago, once the roads were safe and travel was reliable again. She'd offered Millbrook protection and resources as thanks for raising her, and invited Edith specifically to come see how her apprentice had fared. The fact that Edith had accepted, had made the 3-day journey to the castle, meant everything. She hurried through the corridors with Calder at her side, trying not to waddle too obviously despite her belly making grace impossible. By the time they reached the Great Hall, she was slightly breathless. The delegation stood near the center of the hall, a dozen villagers from Millbrook, all dressed in their finest clothing, looking around the grand space with wide eyes. And at the front, leaning on a walking stick but standing tall, was Edith. The healer looked older than Rhiannon remembered, her hair more silver than brown now, her face more lined, but her eyes were the same, sharp, knowing, full of warmth. Edith, Rhiannon breathed. The older woman's face crumpled with emotion. Look at you, she said, her voice thick. Look at what you've become. Rhiannon crossed the distance between them and embraced her carefully, mindful of both Edith's frailty and her own pregnant belly. The healer smelled of rosemary and home, and for a moment Rhiannon was 5 years old again, being comforted after a nightmare. I've missed you, Rhiannon whispered. And I you, child. Edith pulled back to study her properly. Luna Queen, carrying the air, savior of a kingdom. She shook her head wonderingly. I always knew you were meant for something beyond Millbrook, but this, I couldn't have done any of it without what you taught me. Calder stepped forward, inclining his head respectfully. Mistress Edith, thank you for coming. Rhiannon speaks of you often. Your Majesty. Edith studied him with the same assessing look she'd once used on injured animals. You're treating her well, I trust? I'm trying to be worthy of her every day. Good answer. Edith's mouth quirked. She deserves nothing less. Over the next hours, Rhiannon showed Edith and the Millbrook delegation around the castle. She took them to the gardens first, to the herb plot Calder had planted for her. It had grown substantially over the months, with rare specimens she'd acquired from traveling merchants and her own careful cultivation. This is beautiful work, Edith said, kneeling despite her age to examine the plants. You've learned techniques I never taught you. I had good teachers, and time, and a kingdom's resources at my disposal. Rhiannon helped her stand. But I use everything you taught me. The healing center I established here, the network of healers I'm training. It's all based on what I learned from you. She led them to the east wing where she'd converted several rooms into a healing center. Shelves lined with herbs and tonics, beds for patients who needed overnight care, and a small classroom where she taught interested wolves the basics of herbal medicine. You've done more here in 6 months than I did in 40 years, Edith said quietly. I had advantages you never did. Position, authority, resources. But the foundation came from you. Rhiannon squeezed her hand. Will you stay? At least for a while? I'd like our daughter to know her grandmother. Edith's eyes grew bright with tears. Grandmother. Oh, child. I'd be honored. They had dinner in the Great Hall that night. Not a formal state meal, but an intimate gathering. The Millbrook delegation, the council members, Commander Petra, and several others who'd become close to Rhiannon over the months. Lord Edmund presided over the blessing, thanking the moon goddess for the prosperity returned to Greymont. During the meal, one of the younger villagers, a girl barely 16, worked up the courage to approach Rhiannon. My lady, I wanted to thank you. My baby brother was born sick during the curse. The healers said he wouldn't survive past his first year. But after the eclipse, after you broke the curse, he started getting stronger. He's healthy now, running around causing trouble like any other toddler. I'm glad, Rhiannon said, her throat tight. That's what it was all for. Children like your brother. We have a saying in the village now, the girl continued. When things seem impossible, we say, "Remember Rhiannon." Because you did the impossible. Rhiannon didn't know how to respond to that. Calder's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently, grounding her. Later, after the dinner had ended and the guests had retired, Rhiannon walked with Edith through the moonlit gardens. Calder had given them privacy, understanding that some conversations needed to be had without an audience. "Are you happy?" Edith asked as they settled on a stone bench near the fountain. "Yes," Rhiannon said without hesitation. "I am. It's not the life I imagined, but I can't imagine any other life now. You love him, the Alpha King. I do. The mate bond brought us together, but love made us stay. There's a difference." She looked at Edith. "Is that foolish? Loving someone I barely knew 6 months ago? Love is never foolish. Quick sometimes, inconvenient often, but never foolish." Edith patted her hand. "I see how he looks at you. Like you're the sun, and he's grateful for the warmth. That's a good foundation for a life together. I worry sometimes that I'm not enough, that I'm still just the orphan from Millbrook playing at being queen." "You were never just anything," Edith said firmly. "You were always special, different, meant for more than a quiet life in a village. I saw it when you were 5 years old and calmed a wolf gone mad with pain. I saw it when you healed animals that should have died. The prophecy didn't make you special, Rhiannon. It recognized what was already there." The words settled something in Rhiannon that had been restless for months. "Thank you for everything you taught me, for believing in me when I was just a frightened child who'd lost her parents. You taught me as much as I taught you. About resilience, about kindness, about the kind of strength that doesn't need claws or fangs." Edith stood slowly. "Now, I'm an old woman who needs her rest. But I'm grateful I lived to see this, to see you flourish." Rhiannon embraced her once more before letting her go. She remained in the garden alone, listening to the fountain and the night birds singing in the trees. A wolf howled in the distance, answered by another, then another. The pack, healthy and whole, singing to the moon. Footsteps on the path announced Calder's return. He sat beside her, not speaking, just offering his presence. "I've been thinking about the future," Rhiannon said, "about what we want to teach Aurora when she's born. Tell me." "I want her to know she has choices. That destiny might guide, but it doesn't control. That power is meant to serve, not dominate. That kindness isn't weakness." She looked at him. "I want her to grow up knowing she's loved for who she is, not what she can do for the kingdom." "She will," Calder promised. "We'll make sure of it. Both of us." He placed his hand over her belly where their daughter grew. "She'll have what we didn't. Parents who are present, a kingdom at peace, a future free from curses and prophecies. And if another prophecy comes, another crisis, then we'll face it together. As we have everything else." He kissed her temple. "But for now, we have peace. We should enjoy it while it lasts." They sat together in the garden as the moon rose higher, casting silver light across the blooming flowers and flowing water. In the castle behind them, Edith and the Millbrook villagers slept safely. In the territories beyond, packs celebrated the continued prosperity. And inside Rhiannon, their daughter grew strong and healthy, the first child born to Greymont's new Luna Queen. 6 months ago, Rhiannon had been a prisoner, wondering if she'd survive to see another dawn. Now she was a queen, a mate, a healer, and soon to be a mother. She'd saved a kingdom and found her place in it. The journey from that dark cell to this moonlit garden had been terrifying and painful and full of choices that felt too large to make. But sitting here with Calder's arm around her and their daughter moving beneath her heart, Rhiannon couldn't regret a single step. This was where she belonged, where she'd always been meant to be. Home. The word settled into her bones with the same certainty as the mate bond. Greymont was her home now. Calder was her home. The life they were building together, complicated and challenging and full of responsibility, was exactly the life she'd choose if given the chance to decide again. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me time to choose. For making me want to stay. For seeing me as more than a prophecy or a cure." She turned to look at him. "For being my mate in truth, not just in magic." Calder's eyes reflected the moonlight, soft and steady. You're thanking me for the greatest gift I've ever received? I should be the one grateful. Then we're both grateful. Both blessed. She stood, pulling him up with her. Come. I'm tired, and our daughter is kicking like she's training for the guard already. They walked back to the castle hand in hand, leaving the gardens to the moonlight and the singing wolves. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities. Council meetings, visiting dignitaries, preparations for the baby's arrival. But tonight was theirs, simple and peaceful. As they climbed the stairs to their chambers, Rhiannon felt the mate bond humming contentedly between them. It no longer felt like a chain or a burden. It felt like what it had always been meant to be, a connection, a partnership, a promise that neither of them walked alone. The curse was broken. Justice had been served. A new generation was coming. And Rhiannon, who'd once been nothing more than an orphan in a forgotten village, had become the heart of a kingdom reborn. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities and challenges and joys she'd never imagined. But whatever came, she would face it with Calder at her side, their daughter in her arms, and the strength she'd found in choosing love over fear. The end.